be like all the politicians.
Yeah.
Y'all make sure you're, you know, whatever your people are listening.
Justin, are we on? All right, we're on. Welcome, everybody. My name is Robert Henning. I think most of you know me. I'm the director here at the Rockpile Museum. Also got the three of the other full-time staff here with us. Heather Rodriguez, of course, and Justin Horn is back there running our live stream tonight. And then Penny Schroeder was out front, so welcome you. So a good contingent of staff here tonight. A few announcements. We've got some other upcoming events. On September 4th, our own Justin Horn will be doing his presentation about the Battle of Bone Pile Creek. We'll have a special guest, Laurel Vickland will be here. Laurel participated in the excavations, the archaeological excavations at the Caballo Creek rifle pits from that same 1865 Sawyer's expedition. So we'll have two presenters speaking about two different components of that historical event. It'll be a fun night. So come out for that September 4th at 6 p.m. We're partnering with the Pumpkin Buttes chapter of the Wyoming Archaeological Society for that event. We're also trying a little something new, led by our adult education educator, Heather. We're trying some historical travel. So if you're interested in maybe doing a little bit of a field trip, some far, some near, some both. The first one is happening next week. They're taking a trip called the Big Beautiful Trip. Several stops, including the Sheep Herders Festival or the Sheep Herders Rendezvous in Glen Rock. They're going to stop at Independence Rock, South Pass City. They're staying in sheep wagons in Kemmerer, and then digging fossils in the Green River Formation. So a lot of fun things they're planning for that. There's also a trip coming up October 8th. They're going to do a Fall Colors art tour, stopping at some of the local galleries in this region. So if you are interested, please let Heather know. She can get you more details on those trips. And please let us know if there's anything maybe you'd want to go see. We'll take your ideas and suggestions as well. We also have a Kids Craft Day coming up October 16th from 1:30 to 3:30. And that'll be in conjunction with a museum free day. So October 16th, the museum admission will be waived, and that's a parent-teacher conference day. So we want all the kids to come out. So bring your kids and grandkids out that day, October 16th. And then, of course, Christmas crafts is not far away. I said it, Christmas. It's not all that far away, but be prepared. Be prepared for that.
You gotta go somewhere, because the school's already starting, so.
I know, it's hard to believe. Starts on Monday. So enough of that. On to our guest, our special guest tonight, Mr. Lee Silliman, who is a retired educator and museum employee. He taught for 43 years, God bless you, and it became a part-time photo archivist as well for a county museum, much like ours, for 26 years. He also has many hobbies, one of which is really a passion of his. It's collecting historic prints. And he's taken those prints and those collections, and he's created traveling exhibits. And we've had two of his traveling exhibits. Currently, Dramatic Moments, Frederic Remington's art is in the back corner over there. So we'll have a chance to go with Lee after the talk and look at those if you would like to stay. But he's got other things too: wildlife, exploration, national parks, birds, many other subjects. Bison. Stay tuned on that. We'll be hosting his bison exhibit in 2026, so come back for that. Without further ado, good friend of the museum, Mr. Lee Silliman.
Thank you for that kind remark. Can you all hear me? I'm going to use my school speaker's voice, and I'm amplified too. So thank you for that very kind introduction. It's a real pleasure being here for the second time. We were here last year talking about the cowboy. I will want to point out how much credit is due to Robert and Heather and Justin for managing and actually hanging and doing the background work for these exhibits. I mean, you walk in there and you don't realize how much time and effort it takes to bring a project together and put it up and make it so you can really enjoy it. I'm particularly excited about next year you're getting the bison exhibit. It contains contains the earliest of my prints. I've collected probably, well, probably 1,500 or 2,000 prints. I have a bison print created in France in 1614. I just bought it a couple of years ago and I stuck it in the bison exhibit. So you're going to see to my knowledge, it's the second oldest picture of an American bison ever printed. So that's coming next year. Well, we have Frederic Remington here tonight. And after I get done with this program, giving his background and his early career, I kind of divide Remington's career into two phases. The first phase is the phase that created these woodblock engravings. And then I would say the last 10 or 15, maybe 20 years at the most of his life, when he transitioned into a fine art painter, that was like a whole different feature of his life. And I also have a traveling exhibit of those that were reproduced in Collier's magazine. But tonight, we're going to focus on many different themes, and I call them interwoven. I'll be jumping back and forth between some of these themes as we go through. So we're going to briefly start with his childhood, and then go to his early assignment for Harper's Weekly, and move on to how they sent him to the Southwest to observe the Indian Wars and the cowboys, and that's where he got a lot of his material that he used for the rest of his life. He also interacted with African Americans, and I want to go into that in a little bit of detail. He was, I think, the premier illustrator and painter of the horse. We're going to talk about that. We get into some of the weeds about the actual techniques of creating these exhibits. These artworks called woodblock engravings. And then we're going to look at his relationship to Native Americans, and also his fascination with Mexico that a lot of people don't realize, and there's several good examples in there. And he was very proud of the fact that he called himself the soldier's artist. He very much believed in the manifest destiny and the soldiers who were bringing that as a final end to the chapter of dispossession of the Native Americans' land. Briefly, we'll talk about how he did use photography, and I'm a photographer, and so that is an interesting little subcategory. And then just a very brief discussion of his transition. So let's start off with his childhood. He was born to a fairly wealthy family in Upper New York. His father was a Civil War general, and as you can see, anybody who lives in a house like that's not poverty-stricken. He was an only child, and he was very difficult. He was rebellious, and they felt that maybe if they would send him to a military academy, they could enforce some discipline on him. Didn't work very well. Are you all shocked? Some children have a mind of their own, in case you have your own children as proof of that. Here's some of the things that he preferred to do in the military academy was to make drawings. It's one of the early ones. Well, I don't have time to go into a whole lot of detail, but by the time he was matured and in his late teens and early 20s, he had fallen in love with a young woman, and the woman's family said, not this guy. I mean, he was a nobody, and he went out west to get some experience under his belt, and he did like drawing, and so he filled a sketchbook, and when he came back, he showed his sketchbook to the employees at Harper's Weekly. And you got to understand what Harper's Weekly was like. Harper's Weekly was like, although it was a newspaper, it was in effect the only way that everybody in America understood what was going on. It was like radio, television, and the internet, like all wrapped up in one package. If something appeared in Harper's Weekly, the whole country knew about it. So this was a big deal to have a picture in Harper's Weekly. Now, in the beginning, they did not give him credit, and this is a good example. They called this one a Cowboys of Arizona. He actually drew that of Montana or Wyoming Cowboys. exactly where it is from the picture itself. He also sent in this picture, a Remington sketch, and it'll say that by the picture. Sometimes it'll say a picture by so-and-so from a sketch by Frederic Remington. So they were using his sketchbook, and as you know, like this is illustrating. Here's the artist that gets the credit. This is the Oklahoma rush, where they rushed in to claim homesteading things in the 1850s. Here's one more of the impressive scenes that was based on a sketch. Again, he's not given credit, but he's not complaining because he's making money from his sketches being the origin of the pictures, and pretty soon they'll start giving him credit. Now, if you ask me, here is a picture that is totally done by Mr. Fullstrap. That is very inferior, I think, to this picture, at least artistically speaking. Wouldn't you agree that here is the main thrust between the dead soldier and his comrades noting him, whereas this picture, oops, I'm sorry. This picture, I don't think that is very good by Mr. Fullstrap. I mean, the middle of the picture is like empty, and nothing dominates. It's like, anyway, Remington was getting to be a much better artist. Well, Harper's Weekly sent him to the Southwest in Arizona during the Apache Wars, and he sent back some illustrations. And this was the very first illustration that was given, it was credited to Remington himself. So, and for a lot of these pictures that you're going to see on the screen, the originals are in that room. Now, I say the originals, the original woodblock engraving. As you're going to see in this lecture, the woodblocks are a medium, like a mechanical medium to produce multiple copies. They're based upon Remington's original artwork, and we'll dive into that here. The Apaches are coming, and this is based again on his travels to the Southwest in Arizona. To me, that's a little bit, again, artistically speaking, you don't see a dominant figure there. All you see is a line of characters. I mean, yes, you look at this man or this man, but his artistry needed some improvement. And I'll give an example here of how the painting was what the engravers took the image from. And I'll dive into that in a lot more detail. But there's the woodblock engraving, and you can see it in the other room there. But it was based upon his painting. And most of these paintings survived. To make it easier for the engravers and for the reproduction process, a lot of these originals are painted in black and white, either in oils or in watercolors. I threw this in because I would like to illustrate how he was learning composition and artistry. This is by a very notable Henry F. Hardy artist, who I think creates the effective drama between these two. There's no doubt as to what to look at in that picture, is there? It's not like there's too much to look at. You immediately understand the sense this man is in trouble, and it's freezing cold. This man's laying there shirtless. He's in trouble. So I like to use this as an illustration of his improving artistic talents. I think this is a really good example of how you get the sense here, this arc of interest right there. There's no doubt that he has improved his sense of composition for this one. That's one of my, how do you say your favorite picture? That's one of my favorite pictures because it illustrates his emerging talents in the concept of artistry. So, as I was mentioning, there is the original oil painting. It's in the museum in Kansas City. I've seen the original. My relatives used to live Kansas City, so I visited there. But there's your black and white painting that the engraving was based on.
You should have went to the saddle horn, it'd have been a lot easier for him to get a deer on there.
So here's another example of his fascination with the Southwest. And I want to specifically talk about how it doesn't show up on this slide, but you've got to go after the program. And like I did with Heather and Robert afterwards, the sophistication of the woodblock engraving, these are all lines that were carved. And this sense of dust and the blowingness of it, and to think this was done by somebody carving away a piece of wood that was then inked, it's just truly amazing. But you got the real sense there that there's dust in the air. Now that is very difficult to convey in an artwork. And there's the original black and white oil painting in the Amon Carter Museum. Amon Carter Museum is a fantastic multi-million-dollar museum in Fort Worth, Texas, that I think I visited at least 3, maybe 4 times. It has some fantastic Charles Russell and Frederic Remington artwork. So if you get to Texas, try to make it to the Amon Carter Museum.
Where in Texas?
It's Fort Worth, Texas.
Fort Worth.
Sure. So here he painted himself out in the field with the soldiers. This was the beginning of his ingratiation with the military. But it was a two-way street. He was becoming noted as an artist, and so the Army liked having an artist embedded in them, in their forces, because he was then creating illustrations that were then being publicized. So it gave the Army some publicity and notoriety and interest, in the general population. And then he got to go where the action was. It'd be hard to portray the Indian Wars if you weren't at least somewhat there. Now, he might have you believe that he was there in the thick of the Indian Wars, but I've read his, there's like probably 30 or 40 books written about Frederic Remington and maybe more articles than that. He didn't really get close to the real action in the Southwest or at with the Sioux at Wounded Knee. We'll get to that later. So it is accurate, though, that he did embed himself with the Army, and the officers did like that. So here is a picture of Geronimo returning from a raid into Mexico, although they also raided in Arizona too. It shows that he was witnessing to a lot of the, he was close enough to the action to claim he was a reporter on the scene, so to speak. At least more so than an artist that would sit in New York City and try to tell you what Geronimo was doing. All right. His relationship to African Americans, I think, is revelatory. Let's look at his impressions that he wrote in his journals and to letters to people. He had a very positive attitude toward the Buffalo Soldiers. These are the African American soldiers that enlisted after the Civil War to help suppress the Native Americans. The idea was that they wanted to prove that they could fight hard, that they deserved citizenship and respect, as well as the white man did. And as far as Remington was concerned, they proved their point quite well. I'm greatly gratified to be able to say that I like the Negro soldier's character as a soldier in almost every particular. He called them good style men. Having praise of Native Americans was not something you always read in public print, or African Americans in public print. And here's an illustration of the sacrifice. Here's a wounded African American soldier that was rescued by his compatriots. This is the white leader. There was always a white officer in charge of the Buffalo Soldiers. I believe, Nancy, help me, is it Fort Davis in Texas that we visited that's dedicated to the African American soldiers?
There is one, and that sounds like the right name.
I think it was Fort Davis, Texas. There's a small museum They perform very valiantly, very well. This officer right here gained some notoriety because of that picture. His name was, yeah, Watson, that's right. You got it. I can never pronounce things very well. They became friends because of that picture that appeared on the front page of Harper's Weekly. And it was symbiotic, it was a, symbiotic relationship. Having an officer that would send him information and pictures and friendship, and then he would then create the art that would honor the American soldier. Unfortunately, he died prematurely in a drowning accident near Fort Custer. He would have gone on, I think, to quite a much better career. So Remington's diaries and letters are full of positive comments about these African-American soldiers. Now, he did use the word that's verboten now. He used the N-word, but it was not in a derogatory sense. It was just the name they used at the time. Let's see, he called them, he says, these, the N-word, are the best damn soldiers in the world. So he wasn't meaning to denigrate them. He was meaning to give them honor. And here again is a picture of these African-American soldiers on the trail of the Apaches. Men with bark on them. It was not customary in American art to show pictures of rugged frontiersmen who were dirty and smelly and crude, uneducated, smelly. The frontiersman was not what was normally painted, in fine art circles in the early 20th century. But Frederic Remington, I think, brought that Western character to the nation's fore and gave them a better name than they had before. But just look at these faces. Don't these look like guys that you would see on the trail in some backcountry part of the West? Let's see. He romanticized the people that weren't very refined. Remington and the horse. I would say a large number, I don't have a mathematical calculation, but I would say half or more of his paintings had a horse in it. He loved horses his whole life, and he became very, very good at depicting it. And he gave honor to the Western Mustang. The horses that the Westerners had, sometimes they were thoroughbreds or mixtures, but a lot of times they were wild horses that were tamed, that had been roaming free for a long time. So his horses are not always your New York trotting down a fancy street in New York City. They don't look like that. They look like the true rough horse that they really were. And he was able to put the horse in motion in a way that I think is so superior. Again, I'm showing so many of the engravings that are in the exhibit. Heather, would you agree that the real thing is so much more impressive than what you're seeing on the screen?
It is.
So even if you've been in my gallery, I hope after this talk you can get a sense of how much artistry and detail and emotional impact you get from these woodblock engravings, even though they were printed on newsprint by the hundreds and thousands and distributed. To me, they're very, very fine works of art that have survived from that time. And they, as many art historians will recognize, there were not oil painting type museums in America in the 1800s. The way America understood artists and what they were doing was through reproductions. There were no public art museums like you can go to today, or even private ones where you could charge. The valuable artwork that is in museums today was in private hands, in mansions, by the wealthy people of the country. So Remington became famous because, for one, not only because of his own abilities, but because prints were how Americans understood art in the 19th century. But this is one of his better engravings. The idea that he could create a sense of all four of these horses practically in the air, galloping down the middle of the street, I think is really awesome. Now, I want to talk about how he more accurately portrayed the horse than previous artists did. I call it the rocking horse pose. There's other names that can be given, but it's basically where the 2 feet are out in front and the 2 feet are out in back. That was commonly understood what horses, the actual position of the horse's legs during their galloping. And you'll see it in many artworks like I've shown here by other people. William de la Montagne Carey, a man who's had an illustrious career and he's almost totally unknown, but I've actually collected about 85 of his woodblock engravings and donated them to the Montana Museum of Art and Culture. But despite his artistry, he again used not only on the horse, but also on the bison, this idea of the 2 legs out in front and the 2 legs behind, up in the air at the same time. And as we'll see, that's not how horses run. How do we know that? Well, Leland Stanford, the millionaire who made his fortune in the Western Railroads, hired an artist named Edward Muybridge to take some photographs of animals in motion and people in motion. And what they did was they had a long white wall, like a barn wall, or they created a long wall. And they had, I'm going to make up a number, let's say they had like 20 cameras spaced maybe 10 or 15 feet apart, one after another in front of this wall. And they had tripwires that ran from the camera to the wall. And they would have a person walk or a horse run, the rider, across this wall, and the horse's hooves would trip the wire that would fire the camera. It had a very high speed exposure of 1/500th of a second, which is very fast. So these were photographs of horses running across a white background. And this was published in, I think it was 1882. Yes, they published these pictures in 1882. And I'm going to pick apart all of these individual pictures and show you that when Remington depicted a horse in motion, it had reality to it. So here is one where I tried my best to match the position of the legs with actual photograph. There's another one. You can see, I call these like crab legs. They're like tucked underneath. And you can see that's very close to one of the photographs. There's a very similar one of his famous oil painting of the Stampeded by Lightning. Another one, even though these legs are on the ground, you'll notice even if one leg is on the ground, the other 2 are out in front. Can you believe, am I proving to you that he looked at these photographs to make sure that he was depicting the legs of the horse at the proper position? Now, it was claimed by some people that he saw these movements before he ever heard of Muybridge. I think that's baloney. It's just highly improbable that Remington's eyes were capable of seeing where the horse's legs were. In my opinion, and many art critics, he studied Muybridge's photographs. From that time on, he had the right position for the horse's legs. And I think it makes them look much more authentic and much more dynamic to have them what they really were like. And this artist refers to this other, it was a French artist. By the way, this Messiaen was, he was like here's one of his paintings. He was the highest paid French artist in France at the time, and he did not depict the horse's legs properly, but Remington did. So, hooray for Remington. When he began entering some of his paintings that the engravings were based upon into art exhibitions, and sometimes they would win awards. Ironically, I don't think this is even close to some of his best works. If you look at, compare, I have this picture in the exhibit. In my opinion, that is not near as fantastic as some of the ones you've been seeing and the ones I'm going to be showing you. But he was gaining recognition then, not only because Harper's Weekly was publishing his pictures, but because he was entering his original artworks, the oil paintings or the watercolors, into art exhibitions, and that was the beginning of elevating his career. Often we talk about the distinction between an illustrator and a painter. An illustrator you could define as someone who creates art for someone else, either like an editor or a writer, trying to show what somebody else wants you to see. Whereas in the fine art painting concept, the artist is serving himself and painting what he really wants to paint, to express his own views. And Remington lived in both of those worlds. But you're looking at the beginning half of his career. Many, many, many fine artists made a living by being illustrators because it put money in your pocket, and gave you the means to develop your art till eventually, you could make a living selling just your fine art and not reproductions. So here is another example, I think, of his expertise with illustrating the horse. He is so good at showing the horse like up in the air galloping with tremendous force. I cannot name you any artist that comes close to illustrating the horse in motion that compares to Frederic Remington. Let's see, Remington rarely allowed his horses or landscapes to stand alone. Man, animals, and the environment were always intertwined. He admired the inherent grace, strength, speed, and dignity of the Western horse. Once you look at those pictures in there, I think you would agree with that sentiment. And here's just another example of his skill and the engraver's skill. That snow that's blowing around, the idea that you could convey in a woodblock, the idea of a swirl of snow, I think is really amazing. Although he loved the horse and he rode a lot of horses, as his age advanced and his fame advanced, he became more rotund and to the point of almost obesity. He weighed around 250 pounds at the time of his death. So the idea that he was some fantastic horseback rider is not true. But he still loved the horse and knew how to illustrate it. I think it was sad that for him it was sad that he became so overweight that he couldn't really ride the horse like his pictures imply other people are doing. All right, let's take a brief digression into the concept of woodblock engravings, because that is the medium you're seeing here. Let's see, it flourished in the middle 1800s because it gave a cheap way of reproducing multiple copies. And it could be, woodblock engravings can be printed from the same press that the words are printed. With other forms, like lithography, lithography is based on a limestone that literally has the artwork, and the limestone thing is printed onto the paper. You can't do that with newsprint and with words. So the woodblock engraving was really good because you could have the woodblock engraving and the words all in one plate, and they could print thousands of them really quickly and disseminate them. So that made them, as far as sheer numbers, we have many, many million, thousands more wood engravings than these others that could not be paired with text. They had to have very delicate, fine lines, and I think you'll agree once you look at those in there. And this was what was called a relief printing. The area cut away by the woodblock engraver left a raised section behind, and the raised section is what kept the ink and was printed. The opposite of that is the intaglio process, where the groove catches the ink, and the raised parts have the ink removed. So when you see a black line there in these pictures, that is the raised part, and the white part is what was carved away. The engraver drew in reverse on a block of wood, and this block of wood was generally called boxwood. And what you do is you cut a tree across the trunk and maybe have it an inch thick, so the grain is running up towards you. So you don't have any like left and right grain. You're really carving onto the interior of the wood block that has the rings. So you don't have any grain trying to send you in any particular direction. So it was ideal for making these grooves. And you could make thousands of them, whereas that was less true with copper and stone. And sometimes the engravings, woodblock engravings, were so large that they had to do them on several different pieces of wood, and they then joined them together. And I can show you an example. Heather and I found a couple in the room there, didn't we, Heather, afterwards, that it was such a process that sometimes you had to have 2 or more, sometimes 4 blocks of wood to do it. The engravers quite early on were the artists, but afterwards they were simply hirelings and usually didn't get any credit for their work, which Heather thinks is terrible. And in many of the earlier forms, like earlier in the century with these forms, the engraver's name was put on it. I remember seeing in my collection many, many times where there's 2 names, and one is the artist who drew it from nature or whatever, and the other was the engraver. But we've looked, we can't find any names there of the engravers. So the engravers were like technicians. You might say, I gave the analogy, let's say a poet writes a poem, and then a typist sets the type for to print the book. That typesetter doesn't get the credit for the poem. But they do deserve a lot of credit for their skill, as we're going to see. The photography eventually made the woodblock engraving obsolete, and in specific, the halftone reproduction. So let's go into a little bit of this. You have to have a lot of light, and here's a globe of water that takes the light and focuses it down on the woodblock, so that you have a very strong light source illuminating what you're doing. And they carve the lines. Can you believe every white space there is a slice made by a tool by a human being? And the black is the raised part. What I did was I took this section right here, this little corner here, that says Remington, and I blew it up, and you can see every one of these white lines is a stroke from an engraver's tool on a block of wood. That is amazing. I have no quarrel with the good engravers of the block, the men, blah, 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 but the clumsy blacksmiths turned wood choppers who invariably made my drawings say things that I did not intend them to say. These were the fellows who made my youthful spleen rise up. He's complaining about the ability of the woodblock engravers. I use this as an example, this picture as an example. I think that is one of the lesser pictures in the exhibit. I don't think that shows Remington's artistry in here as well, so maybe he can blame the engraver for that one. Here's an example of the woodblock engravings done on 2 different blocks of wood, and they were forced together, but they didn't get them quite tight enough. And you can see a white line. Here's another engraving. And in fact, sometimes there were 4 blocks of wood, like 1, 2, 3, 4, and you can see actually an intersection of the lines. Heather, how many did we find? 2 or 3 where you could see the blocks together in the exhibit? But you never would have noticed that if we hadn't pointed it out, right?
I did not until you pointed it out.
Yeah. Along came the halftone process. The halftone process is a photographic process, and it uses circles of different diameters, of different spacing, to create the sense of gradation of tones. Have you looked at a newspaper picture with a magnifying glass and you see just a bunch of dots, or in a magazine? So it's still used today. And then the artists, the technicians decided to use different colors for different plates to create a three-dimensional process using color dots. And let's look at some of the differences between the woodblock engraving and a halftone. There is much more smoothness to the total effect when it's a halftone process. There's just a very nice mellowness to it. And this is one of the pictures that, there's three in the exhibit that are halftones. I threw those in there as like a contrast. The woodblock engravings, I think, are superior, but there's something really nice and pleasant about the smoothness you see. But I like the drama and the texture of the woodblock engraving. It was an art that is put out of business by, just like the horse collar makers went out of business, the woodblock engravers had to go find another job, because you could much more efficiently photograph an original work of art and create the dot structure that would give you that. And so the engravers lost their livelihood, went on to something else. Oh, I see there's only two halftones. We're going to have to see. I think there's three. You're going to have to check this out. And here is one of the halftones that's in the show. And there's an example of the color halftone. The color halftone process came into its fore in the early 1900s, and Remington took advantage of it. He had a contract with Collier's magazine, and they basically agreed to reproduce just about anything that he painted with the color halftone process. In fact, that's what one of my newer exhibits is all about, is the color halftones that he had published in Collier's Weekly. And they're collector's items. Just a little sidebar, Remington, they're not always, it shouldn't surprise you that art critics don't always praise artwork, they find things wrong with it, what they don't like, or what they could have done better, or whatever. So Remington was sparring with art critics, and he got so mad, and he had a temper, that he burned 9 of the paintings that were reproduced in Collier's. So in this exhibit that I have, that I'm trying to talk Robert into, eventually someday, right? The Remington and Collier exhibit that I have has the only known copies of these artworks that he burned in a fit of anger. He threw them out the window, made a pile, and set them on fire. There's lots of copies of these, but nobody has the original oil painting like I've shown you for some of these woodblock engravings. But you can see why the public, I agree that color is fantastic, although I'm a black and white photographer, so I'll still hold out for the monochromatic, the black and white image, or the woodblock art. But I understand that color is really an attractive genre, a mode of art. So there's another example of his Collier's Weekly color pictures. Let's look at his relationship to Native Americans. It was nothing like Charlie Russell. I'm from Montana. Charlie Russell is our patron saint. And Charlie Russell really got to know the Indians and respected them a lot. Remington was using them more as a motif. He respected them as warriors. He admired their courage and their ability to fight for the retention of their homelands. But he did not have a basic empathy like Charlie Russell did. But he still wanted to portray them with dignity, as you'll see in many of the pictures. And I think this portrays his attitude, a questionable companionship. Do these two people trust each other at that time, in the 1880s, 1890? And When Heather and I were looking at these just before the program, this picture has an entirely different feel than some of the others. We think there was more than one engraver that handled his engravings, and you can see that this has got much more apparent style of illustration. So compare this picture to the others when you go afterwards. The American Indian, let's see, he knows everything. He had a lot of respect for them. They knew their country. The white man was an intruder in their country. And he's talking about how the American soldier is in Indian country. You never know when, he's going to be a victim of some unseen scout out there. He was willing to depict some of the engagements that the Native Americans engaged in their defense of their homeland. Again, here is illustration of the black and white original oil painting. It's down in Eamon Carter, and there's the engraving from it. Obviously, they're two different renditions, and this is kind of sad. He wanted to portray the sun dance. They got there too late, so what did they do? They bribed some Indians to pose for this picture. I think it was terrible. It cost us a chest of pea, plenty of sugar, and money, but they came back with an idea of what the sun dance was like. I think that was pretty, I don't give them respect for that. Remington in Mexico. I'm not sure that I have the exact date and time and where he went in Mexico, but we know in the Southwest, Mexican Americans, the American territories that we took from Mexico in 1840 retained a lot of Mexican people, but he also traveled into Mexico, and I think he really admired their sense of color, their sense of love of life, their food, and so he did a lot of artwork illustrating life in Hispanic countries. And there is an oil painting that he did showing a bullfight in the woodblock engraving. It's in the other room showing that. He just did a lot of paintings showing the color and the majesty of the Mexican people. Once again, the oil painting, engraving. He illustrated a small military enterprise. This man Garza led a revolt across. He was actually in Texas. They led a revolt across the Rio Grande to go into Mexico to try to overthrow the Mexican government. The U.S. Army and the Mexican Army crushed the man pretty quickly, but he was able to do some pictures reporting on that. So Remington does consider himself the soldier's artist because of his symbiotic relationship. Here's General Miles, and here's Remington right next to him. So he ingratiated himself with, as I mentioned before, with the officers of the American Army because he was portraying them in the way that the Army liked to see, and so they were glad to have him there. And he was actually near Wounded Knee during the troubles that led to the horrible massacre at Wounded Knee. So here he is depicting himself. There is Remington right there. I believe this is General Miles. He wasn't there at the actual battle. The trouble was caused by the hope that this dance would bring back the buffalo and make the white man disappear and things could go back to the way they used to be. And as we know, that was not the case. This is the third halftone that's in the exhibit. It was initially it was a battle, but it turned into quite a massacre of men, women, and children. I won't go into the details. They were getting close to the action. This is Remington right here depicting himself. But some Sioux saw this wagon approaching the reservation area where they were, and they said it would be good for your health to turn around and go back. And they decided it was better for their health to do that, so they did. But he was within, I think, hearing. They could hear the battle itself. He was really very jealous of another artist who painted the American soldier named Charles Schreiber. I can't pronounce it, sorry. This is one of my favorite paintings by this author. When I was in high school, I actually had did some oil painting, and I reproduced this picture, and I still have it. But it really got under Remington's skin that here was an up-and-coming artist of the American Army, and his name was not Frederic Remington. And he was a New York artist. It's not like he rode with the troops in the heat and in the backcountries of the Southwest. So to a degree, Remington really was the soldier's artist. But this man was making really neat, good paintings of the American soldier. It really ticked him off a lot. And Remington criticized Mr. Schreiber for not having all the accoutrements and the details in the picture. Remington was very proud of the fact that he had a large supply of like the clothing and the implements of the cowboy, the soldier, the Native American, and that all of the artifacts in his paintings were accurate, and he criticized this other artist. And but the other artist had all the details right too. Oh, okay, photography. You might be surprised to learn that Remington actually did use photography as the basis for some of the details of his paintings. So he had a camera. He called it a Kodak, although I don't believe he spelled it right. I think he used a C. You know, back in the earliest days, a Kodak camera came with film, and you sent the camera back, and they developed the film. But after a while, they figured out, why didn't the customer keep the camera and just send the film back? But that's a technological thing. But he did use the camera as a means of recording the artifacts, the details of things. He talks about it's important to have a journal describing it in words, to making field sketches. Here he is sketching a woman. But he also admits that he took many photographs and used them as references. His notes, I think, were valuable for his color palette, but the details. And let's look at, he says, photographed to my heart's content, the Indians, they didn't seem to notice. I could beat a Kodak. He didn't spell it right. They have no brains. The artist must know more than the camera. I got a lot of ideas, but no sketches because my camera was not loaded. So he's equating a photograph as a sketch. Just like, you know, many artists would like take an hour or so and do a field sketch of something, and then that's the reference for a very fine and more detailed work of art later. So he was using the photograph as a field sketch, like many artists would do, to just, you know, quickly in an hour render one. Here's an example of a photograph in his collection, and maybe that provided the background for the building he had here in this really neat one about trying to control a rock. Whoa, would you believe that the Montana photographer, L.A. Huffman, was actually copied by Remington? Isn't that almost a direct copy? I mean, it's not one for one, but maybe 80%. Yeah. And here is just actually a direct photograph. I think we would agree that the artist was breathing life into the pictures of the West that a camera just couldn't do back in those days. Transition into a fine art painter. So let's look at just 1888, which is like the prime years for his woodblock engravings. He had 59 of them. In Harper's, 93, He he was really making a lot of appearances and this man, he was a workaholic. He would get up early in the morning. He probably painted 6 days a week, if not 7 days a week. He'd take a break maybe in the afternoon and then continue. He was married, he had no children, but I think his works of art are in the range of around 3,000. So he was constantly doing his art by the middle of the 1880s. Let's see. He does talk about how he wants to transition and get away from just painting, in black and white and start using color and submitting them to magazines. And let's see. Oh. So he was, turnabout is fair play. He's taking somebody else's field sketch and being the artist. Instead of like what was happening to him in his early part of his career when his field sketches were drawn by other artists. Sideline. Not only was he submitting paintings to exhibitions, but he was creating the artworks for important works of art. Elizabeth Custer's biography, Roosevelt's Ranch Life of the Hunting Trail, and the Song of Hiawatha. These were very widely disseminated works of literature, and he was the main artist in the first edition publications. I'm sure that the first editions of these things were probably in the hundreds of dollars. Now, he did the illustrations of them, and as well as Francis Parkman, the Oregon Trail. So he was getting out there. Here is a large oil painting called The Last Lull in the Fight that won the silver medal in the Paris International Exposition of 1889. And for an American artist to win a prize like that in Paris was really something. Let's see, it sold like over 20 years ago for $4.3 million. I bet if it was, I don't know the history of this, but I bet if it came up for sale today, it would be in the vicinity of $10 million. That's what some of Remington's works are doing. Now, this was the basis for the woodblock engraving, and I want you to notice that either with or without the permission of Remington, they changed it. See the center figure there? That's different than the original one there. In fact, I think I've got a slide showing both of them together. So you see how he changed it. You could almost make the argument that the woodblock engraving, I think, is more dramatic and a better work of art than the original painting. So let's hear it for woodblock. By comparison, this masterpiece, which is in the Cody Museum, by no less than Albert Bierstadt, who was America's highest paid living artist at one point in his career. That painting was rejected. So you can imagine how Remington felt having some of his paintings being accepted and somebody like Bierstadt being. And I think it's what's kind of unfair is that the last of the buffalo, who did in the bison? Oh, it must have been the Indian, right? Mm-hmm. Wrong. I don't have, it can easily be made that all Native Americans were part of the disappearance of the buffalo. About 95% of it can be laid at the feet of the white man. Yes, the Indian did kill buffalo for subsistence, but the major slaughter was done by white hunters. But that's another story for another visit. So in a way, it's okay that this was rejected because it gave the wrong message that the Indian was the one who was responsible for the extermination of the American bison. So this picture also won just acclaim, the 1889 Academy of Design. The American Academy of Design was one of the most sought after awards American artists could aspire to, and it won it. Now, I have a particular connection to this painting. It belongs to the Amon Carter Museum in Fort Worth, Texas, and it's not true now, but years ago, I've been there Nancy, didn't we go there when we were first married? How many years ago? 50? 50? Is it 57? 59 years. Anyway, it was in the first few years of our marriage, we went to the Damon Carter Museum. And when you walked in, there's like a big open area before you go into the galleries. And at the far left end was this huge painting. Look, it's like almost 7 feet wide. It's huge, with a huge frame. I mean, they had it as the one picture you see when you walked into the Damon Carter Museum. And it's just really grand. And look again how his depiction of the horse in motion. And we were there a few years ago, and it's not hanging there anymore. It must be somewhere else in the museum. But anyway, I think, this shows his transition to the world of the fine art painter that he was evolving into. And if you'd like more closely to where you live here, this is reproduction. This is his studio, and it had all these accoutrements, that he claimed would show that he had the right equipment. He wasn't just dreaming up costumes and equipment. And that has been reproduced at the Buffalo Bill Center for the Western County. I assume most of your people have been to that museum. Perhaps have seen this, so you've had a taste of him. So this quote here, let's see, for a considerable time his pictures were invariably marked by a garishness. Again, here our critics have to criticize, right? But then came a change. He left behind him the brittleness of the pen drawings and that profusely illustrated magazines. I think that's another dig that's not warranted. These were illustrated for magazines. His reds and yellows had blared too mercilessly from his canvases, began to take on more of the aspects of nature. Incidentally, the mark of the illustrator disappeared and that of the painter took its place. So even though he's taking digs at Remington there, he's giving him credit for arising from that low position of being an illustrator to the fine art artist. And he asked to have a simple message put onto his gravestone. He knew the horse, which I think is amply justified, and his wife refused to do it. So that's what his gravestone says today. But I think when you review the woodblock engravings, you'll agree with me that he did know the horse quite well and depicted. Thank you very much for your attention.
Any questions before we go take a look?
Yes.
There were three, the Song of Hiawatha, the first one by Mrs. Custer.
Yes.
Was she Custer's wife?
Wife. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. Right.
Thank you.
She basically made a living keeping his name alive.
His name alive. Yeah.
Right. Right. That's how she made a living.
What was his first name? Armstrong. George.
George Armstrong.
Geez, 3 words. Must have been English.
Speaking of the Battle of the Bighorn, where he and 270 or 80 men went down, white men. I have in my collection a big double-page woodblock engraving of the Battle of the Little Bighorn by William de la Montagne Carey, the man I mentioned before. And it was printed in France like 3 months after the battle. I think it's the second most recent picture of the Battle of the Little Bighorn that was published. It's a big, beautiful engraving. Just a little side note. More questions? Yes.
So, when you were talking about his later career as a painter, a lot of the critics seem to focus on like how his work changed. How do you feel his early work really influenced that later part of his career? I'm sorry, that's a very limited question.
Well, I think every artist learns. I mean, I know a lot about Charlie Russell being a Montana president, and I mean his work is a lot. Every artist progresses in their talent and their understanding. They learn from other artists. They learn what is accepted by the art world, or maybe they go off in the directions that appeal to themselves. But I feel like his illustration career was absolutely fundamental to his transition into a fine art painter. He concentrated on form, black and white painting, black and white woodblock engravings, monochromatic. You have to concentrate on the composition. So I feel like that part of his training was absolutely essential. You have to have good composition. And then it was only later than when he didn't know Charlie Russell, although they were aware of each other. But Russell went through this same transition. You have to bring color into it as you're moving into oil paintings, because oil paintings, are a rainbow of colors. And so the illustration period gave him his training to become a good person for composition. And then the color palette comes from your understanding of the world that you're painting and develop that. So I don't know if I directly answered your question.
I think you got the area.
Yeah, the illustration period was fundamental, and then you began to build on that with the world of color once you understand composition.
There are sculptors, there are sculptures at the Buffalo Bill Center of the West.
Yes.
That are they Remington?
Yes.
And they are mock-ups of larger sculptures, or they're the original? What is it?
Yeah, I haven't delved into it all, but Remington not only was the illustrator with woodblocks and with fine art oil painting, he was also a sculptor,
Right.
just like Charlie Russell was. Remington made those sculptures of the size he wanted and then turned them over to foundries to create.
Right.
But then, since then, other copies have been made, and they're not given the credit in the art world because they weren't done by the artist or with the artist's cooperation, so to speak, or acknowledgement. But it would not surprise you that many of Remington's sculptures show the horse in action. And that's difficult with sculpture because it has to not topple over. The center of mass has to be above the center. I was a physics teacher. And it takes great skill, but I think the men with the bark on them concept and the horse in action, those come through in his sculptures as well as his paintings. Yes.
Would you say that he was self-taught then?
Oh, absolutely.
Because I think your whole talk, unless he had, I doubt he had an art teacher at the military academy.
No, right. He went to an art school. I think he attended, don't hold me to this, Yale, for half a semester or so. He did have a few months of art training, and it just revolted him. He left it behind. He felt he learned nothing. So he and Charlie Russell were totally self-taught artists. And I think
the foremost artists of the 19th century West, aren't they considered?
yes,
Those two men?
yes, those two are the titans of the West. If I ever give a lecture or a class, that's going to be Titans of the West, Frederic Remington and Charlie Russell. They were both self-taught totally and achieved the pinnacle of Western art.
You've mentioned a half a dozen times that you're Montana.
Yes,
Where do you live?
Missoula, Montana. We moved to a small town called Denton from 1969 to 1974, where I was a teacher. It's in the middle of the state in Charlie Russell. I literally grew up in the Midwest and wanted to move to Charlie Russell country. And the Judith Basin is in Fergus County, surrounded by mountains and wheat fields and Missouri River breaks. And then after 5 years,
He got the job on the telephone.
yeah, they were so desperate for a teacher, they hired me on the phone. Didn't even have a personal interview, but it worked out well, didn't it, Nancy? And then we moved to Deer Lodge, Montana, where I taught for 37 years. And we moved to Missoula right after I retired in 2011. And we're closer to one of our two daughters who lives in Portland, so we can take a day's drive to visit her. Well, I'd be glad to have you follow me into the gallery and you take a look at some of the many things I have taught you about woodblock engravings.
That's right. You'll look at it differently.
Yes, you will.